Hi, I'm Larry Menti. Welcome to Another Thing. The heroin epidemic continues as law enforcement, legislators, and families try desperately to come up with solutions. We're going to take a look at the epidemic from all sides as we speak with a prosecutor, a treatment specialist, a former addict, and a woman who lost 2 loved ones to heroin. But we start with Ellen Kolodziej, who reports on the grip that heroin has on our area. Ellen.
Thanks, Larry. Heroin addiction is growing in every demographic group in this country, but the CDC says it's especially skyrocketing among middle-class, white, suburban men. In fact, 90% of new heroin users are white. And here in Delaware County, they've seen a record number of deaths because of heroin overdoses, and that's why the DA here decided to take action.
About a year ago, we were able to give every single police department naloxone, which is the opioid antidote, which will bring someone who's overdosing back to life. And as we speak today, it's been utilized 142 times.
142 lives saved in Delaware County because of naloxone or Narcan. DA Jack Whelan fought to get Narcan in the hands of police because he saw just how easy it was for people to get hooked on prescription drugs.
And then what happens is then they try to get them on the black market, they can't afford it, and then they turn to heroin, which is a deadly, deadly, dangerous drug.
And so cheap.
It is very cheap, only a fraction of the cost of an opioid prescription.
Whelan says one OxyContin pill costs $25 to $28 on the street. Heroin costs $5 or less. President Obama recently spoke in West Virginia about the growing heroin epidemic and why he'd like to spend $133 million on more drug prevention programs.
So this crisis is taking lives, it's destroying families, it's shattering communities all across the country.
It's exploding. It's very, very troubling how big of a problem it is. And it's everyone. It's not certain areas, certain neighborhoods, certain people, it's everyone.
And it's not just a problem in the Philadelphia region. What we're seeing, it's a problem throughout Pennsylvania, and we're learning it's a problem throughout the country.
Now, all 4 states in our area, Pennsylvania, New York, Delaware, and New Jersey, all have a law that makes it easier for anyone to get a hold of Narcan and possibly save a life. There's also something called the Good Samaritan Law, and that means if you call 911 to report a heroin overdose, you will not be prosecuted. Reporting for Another Thing, I'm Ellen Kolodziej.
All right, thank you, Ellen. To talk more about the heroin epidemic, I want to introduce Rory Wells, an assistant prosecutor with Ocean County in New Jersey, and Wayne Wirta, who is president and CEO of the National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence, New Jersey. Thank you both for being here. As I've already talked to you about, I think it's important that we have a law enforcement and prosecution side, and we also have a treatment side, because I think both need to work together, and I think both of you would agree to deal with this problem. Let me start with you, sir. How big is the problem right now?
Well, it's a big problem in New Jersey. According to the Center for Disease Control, we have 3 times the average of overdose than any other state in the country. So it's a very serious problem nationwide, but particularly in New Jersey. I'm not sure all of the reasons for that, the availability of heroin. Obviously most of the kids start with prescription drugs, but it's, believe it or not, easier and cheaper to get heroin than it is to get prescription drugs. And then you don't know what you're getting when you're buying heroin on the street. You don't know if it's mixed with something, you don't know the potency of it. And so people inadvertently have overdoses because they don't really know what they're taking.
And what you just said is worrisome to me. And I believe, I've heard it from so many people, I guess it is true. This started with the pharmaceutical industry?
Well,
not the heroin epidemic, but the current heroin epidemic, because heroin was a drug before they came out with these drugs. Yeah. But they did take a lull. So the new epidemic, is that the pharmaceutical industry?
It appears to me that certainly with this latest epidemic, maybe 3 to 5 years ago, there was such an explosion in the abuse of prescription painkillers, certainly at a greater level that it seemed to me historically had occurred. And what Wayne was talking about a lot of the times is people will, when they can't afford the prescription pills, or the avenues that they're taking to get the prescription pills dry up, they run out of the scripts or whatever the case may be, ultimately they transition to heroin. So it does seem like the explosion in prescription drugs and and the abuse of those prescription drugs. That's what I really want to highlight, because obviously some prescription drugs have a purpose, and used properly can certainly aid people, but the abuse of those prescription drugs, the ease at which people can get at them, certainly contributed greatly to the problem we have today.
Should there be more restrictions on this?
Well, in my opinion, it seems like a lot of attention has just started to be paid to that problem, the overprescribing, what the doctors' associations, the American Medical Associations can do, and some other groups and agencies. Like the pharmacists have done a number of improvements in terms of their diligence in examining these prescriptions as they come into these pharmacies, as calling law enforcement when things don't look on the up and up, confirming with doctors and those sorts of things. So I think...
But they're still too easily attainable. I
agree.
mean, and you're hearing these stories like we talked about the Chris Christie video. You're hearing all these stories in Rush Limbaugh. I mean, it doesn't matter where you are in life. This isn't a back alley drug anymore. It's people getting addicted just because they're being given this by their doctor, and then they get addicted. So should there be more restrictions than even what they're talking about now?
Sometimes when you over-restrict, of course, you got to be careful not to create a black market. But in this case, I think certainly we can do more. Certainly we can do more. And it seems to me at some point the doctors were prescribing large amounts of pills, and maybe those prescription numbers have gone down and those sorts of things. But certainly, specifically, what can we do in terms of those prescription painkillers? I think a lot of the fight for us has to be on the decision-making side, on the consumer side, because the availability of the prescription drugs is just, it's pervasive.
I want to move on, but it does seem like people throw their hands up and say, well, there's nothing we can do about the prescription drugs, and you certainly were able to limit morphine, and so why can't they just limit this more and then handing it out? When people come to you for treatment, I don't think a lot of people understand what they have to go through to heal. And for some people, it seems almost an impossible process. Can you describe what the process is like?
Well, I mean, it's a long process. People generally, there's some incidents that gets them to seek to change. Some level of comfort. It might be arrest and the criminal justice system. It might be the job, employee assistance program saying, if you don't get your act clean, you're not going to work here anymore. It might be a family member doing an intervention and saying, we're not going to support you in the way we've supported you unless you get treatment.
But jump ahead just for time. Get to the treatment. I understand.
Well, I mean, the treatment, first of all, they have to, there's a variety of avenues to treatment. Some people need residential treatment for a period of time. That varies by individual. Certainly in the case of narcotics, medicated assisted treatment, either buprenorphine or methadone, is very helpful in the beginning stages, in particular of somebody getting off of the drug and trying to deal with the physical, desires that come with it. It's very helpful to have that medication assistance so that they don't have to deal and cope with the physiological demand for it, and then can focus on counseling on the reasons and the issues around that. But it's long. It takes time. People have to be in treatment for, people are in treatment, again, not necessarily residential, but, 6 months a year, 18 months, with, between some residential, some intensive outpatient, some recovery support services. I mean, it's a combination of things that do take a long period of time. And also, they're starting to discover that it takes time for the brain to heal. These drugs change the function of the brain.
Oh, okay.
They change the function of the brain. And they've done studies where they've shown people when they're given cocaine, for instance, parts of the brain light up. After a while, when they ask them to think about cocaine, the same parts of the brain light up.
Are we getting to the point where usage may not be a crime?
Well,
I know that's
it depends on the drug, and it certainly depends on if the person is using and selling, or if they're clearly just using. And we've seen some things with what's commonly called the Bon Jovi law, where if somebody is there's an overdose that occurs, we want to encourage the individual who is there with them or sees that occur, we want them to call police, and there's limited or no prosecution for that individual, as long as they're not the dealer. But it depends on the drug. I mean, clearly society is deciding what we want to do and how far we want to go with marijuana. And clearly, that would be a little bit different than if you're talking about prescription painkillers, if you're talking about heroin and some of those other drugs as well. So, you know, in determining usage itself, whether that's a crime, it still is a crime. You still obviously can get in trouble legally. But the decision is this somebody that needs to be diverted to treatment, or is this somebody that needs to be held accountable under the law criminally and perhaps a more stringent response?
We never have enough time. And I would love to talk to you both more about this if you both come back, because this is something that is important to me and this show and the people that run this station. And so would like to continue the conversation and do it with more time. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming in. Thanks so much. Rory Wells, Assistant Prosecutor with the Ocean County, New Jersey Department, and Wayne Wirta, President and CEO of the National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence, New Jersey. When we continue with another thing, we're going to talk to two people who have been personally affected by heroin addiction. That's when Another Thing continues.